there's this idea in the Old Testament that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And it's a pretty harsh idea. But there's something really useful about it, because one of the things you see with people all the time is that maybe they're trying to stumble forward towards their ideal, as poorly defined as it might be, but then they're afraid, right? They're afraid about what they might encounter, and that stops them, because fear does stop people. It freezes you like a prey animal, and so people move ahead, but then they get afraid, and then they stop moving ahead. And that's not so good, because negative emotion is a really powerful motivator. So we're more motivated by negative emotion than positive emotion. Quantitatively speaking, you can measure that. And that's, I think, because we can only be so happy, but we can really be suffering and dead, you know. So we have to pay more attention to the negative. And that's bad, because the negative can stop you. And then in my clinical practice, you know, I often talk to people who are trying to make a difficult life decision, and they're weighing out the costs and the benefits of making the life decision, you know. And one of the things I always talk to them about is, wait a second, that's an incomplete analysis. You have to weigh out the benefits and the costs of doing this. And you have to weigh out the costs and benefits of not doing it. And that's not the same as the zero that you assume that you're starting with, right? Because to not make a decision, it also has a cost. And sometimes the cost of not making a decision is far worse than the cost of making a decision, even if the decision is risky. And so one of the things you can derive from that, and this is very useful, I think, is that this is also, I think, why it's so useful to contemplate your mortality, so to speak, is you're screwed no matter what you do. You know, and that actually frees you, is that you have path A that has catastrophes, and you have path B that has catastrophes, and you don't get to have the no catastrophe path, but you get to pick which one. And that's really something, because if you know that there's terrible risk associated with everything that you do and don't do, then you can afford to take some risks, because you're not, you know, and this is all within the ark metaphor. I'm still making the case that despite the fact that your life is essentially catastrophic, you can make a covenant with the highest ideal, and that will take you through it the best way possible. I'm still making that case. So then you think, okay, well, I'm trying to make this decision. I'm going to go try to do something difficult, and isn't that terrifying? And then you think, yeah, but wait a minute. What's really terrifying is not doing it. And then you think about the cost of not doing it. So in the future authoring program, we have people do this little meditative exercise, which is, okay, just think about your insufficiencies by your own definition, right? The way that you don't do what you know you should do. About the things that you do that you shouldn't do, that you know you shouldn't do beyond a shadow of a doubt, right? There's some things like that. And that's bad habits and poor aim and all of the resentment and hatred and aggression and unresolved conflicts and all those things that are dementing you and warping you, and then think, okay, those things get the upper hand, man. They get the upper hand, and they take you the worst possible place you could go in the next 3 to 5 years. What exactly does that look like? And so you sketch all that out, and you think, hey, I don't want to go there. And so the next time that a temptation comes up, you think, well, it'd be a lot better for me if I didn't succumb to this temptation. It's like, that's kind of weak, eh? You'd look a little better if you didn't eat like a cheesecake a day or something like that. You know, that's something, but it's not the same as, I'm going to have diabetes and I'm going to lose my damn leg in 5 years if I don't get my eating under control. That's motivating. And so then the temptation comes along and you think, oh, how about no? Seriously, how about no? Not just because a higher good would be obtained if I avoided it, but because a terrible catastrophe would be averted if I didn't. And so, well, so you want to get your fear behind you, right? You want to get it behind you where it's pushing you forward instead of in front of you where it's stopping you. And you get your fear behind you, pushing you forward by actually thinking through the consequences of not putting your life together. And the least of those is that you waste it and suffer, right? Because you're going to suffer anyways, man. So you waste it and suffer. That's a bad deal. Because maybe if you're going to suffer, you could at least do something noble and glorious and upright and powerful and honorable and admirable and helpful and difficult. You know, that's just so much better. And maybe that's good enough so that you think, hey, you know, little suffering, it's basically worth it. At least it's a way forward, you know? At least it's a way forward. Beauty is one pathway towards God. And if you can't find another pathway, then why don't you use beauty? I'm sure most of you do that with music, because music is the one thing that modern people can't be cynical about. Thank God for that. And been fascinated by music because of that. It speaks meaning to people, right? You know, I've mentioned to people that they should clean up their rooms. That's become quite the internet meme. But I'm really serious about it because it's really hard to do that. And I've been cleaning up my room, by the way, for about 4 months now because my life was thrown into such a catastrophe, and also we were renovating. And so, but it isn't just that you clean it up, you also make it beautiful. And it's really hard to make something beautiful. And it's really worthwhile. And what's really cool is if you learn to make something beautiful, even one thing, if you could just make one thing in your life beautiful, then you've established a relationship with beauty. And then you can start to expand that relationship with beauty out into the world, like into other elements of your life. And that is so worthwhile. It's just incredibly, crazily worthwhile. And that's an invitation to the divine. You know, you have to be daring to do that. And people are terrified of it. People are terrified of color. They paint their walls beige. They're terrified of art. They buy some mass-produced thing because they don't want anybody laughing at them for their lack of taste. Because what do you know, right? You have to develop it. And so you're going to stumble along and make mistakes to begin with. It's kind of hard on your self-esteem, but you're stumbling towards the kingdom of God. That's what you're stumbling towards when you try to make an aesthetic decision and to put something in your life that's beautiful. And it's unbelievably worthwhile to do that. Man does not live by bread alone. That's exactly right. We live by beauty. We live by literature. We live by art. And literally, not metaphorically. We cannot live without it because life is too dismal and tragic in the absence of the sublime. So, and ourselves, we have to be sharp so that we can survive properly and orient the world properly and not destroy things, including ourselves. You are somewhere, you're a certain way, you're moving forward, something happens that you don't expect, it blows you into pieces, it introduces chaos, right? You face the dragon, you get the gold, or maybe the bloody thing eats you and the story is over. And then you get to where you're going. But then the question is, well, what happens when you get to where you're going? And that's a really important issue because one of the things that happens to people all the time in their life is that they get to where they're going and then they don't know what to do, right? So, for example, you graduate from university. It's like, okay, story over. Who are you now? Who are you the next day? And so what happens is when you succeed, then there's a success crisis. And the success crisis is, well, I've run this story to its end. Now what? What you should do when your story comes to an end, when you've achieved what it is that you want to achieve, when you've achieved what you need to achieve, then the next question is, okay, well, now I'm that person or I have that character. What do I need to do next? And some of that is always, well, what do I need to give up now? What do I need to let go of so I can move to the next plateau, right? Assuming that your life is a sequence of upward moving. It's like Sisyphus, except you're actually, each time you climb up the mountain, you get a little higher on the mountain. It's something like that. So it's Sisyphus with an optimistic bent. And maybe if you push the rock up the mountain properly and let it roll down, and if you do that right, then it's okay. Every time you roll it back up, it's better in some sense. You know, one of the experiences I've had in my life, fairly commonly, in a variety of different ways, this is especially true when I was paying a lot of attention to my dreams, which I did for about 15 years, I guess, something like that. Now and then I would feel like I'd learned some things and had sort of consolidated them, and then before I went to sleep, I'd think, okay, I'm ready to learn something else. It's like, and I didn't say that without trepidation, and because usually when you learn something, you know, it's not that pleasant, because you usually learn something about why you're wrong. And the deeper the thing that you learn, the more you learn about why you're wrong. And there's a death that's associated with that, because then you have to let that part of you that's wrong die. And that's the sacrifice, right? And so you have to make a sacrifice. You have to be willing to make a sacrifice before you're going to learn something. Perhaps what you'll learn is in proportion to your willingness to make a sacrifice. And I really do believe that. I do believe that as well, because I also think that if you commit to something, that means that you don't do a bunch of other things, right? So that's the sacrifice of all those other things. You commit to it and you set your sights on it. If you really commit to it and you get the sacrifice right, so to speak, then the probability that that thing will be successful vastly increases. And I think that that's also not a naive way of thinking or a foolish way of thinking. My experience has been that that's the case.